In a few weeks, it's our wedding. You have to fit into that dress on the big day.
But Jin-ho, that's impossible. I just had your baby. I cannot lose all this weight in such a short time. You will wear that dress. That is not a request. That is an order. I say no, not on my wedding day, not like this. The wives of my associates are all slim and elegant. I am one of the most powerful men in Texas. I need to be proud to walk beside you. Jin-ho, please, don't punish me for carrying your child. I will make more effort. I promise. The wedding is canceled. You could not fit into the dress. You are an embarrassment to my name, to my family, to everything I have built. I never want to see you near me or near my child again. You are nothing, Amina. Nothing. No, wait. This heartbreaking story will show you how the gaze of others can shatter a family from the inside and prove to you that true revenge is never to destroy. It is to rise so high that those who broke you are forced to watch. But before we continue and discover Amina's incredible fate, don't forget to subscribe, click the notification bell, and tell us in the comments which country you are watching from. The morning sun rose over River Oaks, Houston, Texas, the wealthiest neighborhood in one of the wealthiest states in America, and poured itself without apology through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the penthouse on the 42nd floor of Kwan Tower. The light fell across white marble floors over the edges of custom furniture that had been flown in from Milan and Seoul, saw past walls hung with original art that no one in the building had chosen for love. Everything in that penthouse spoke the language of power. Every surface said, "Someone important lives here." And in the center of the vast, silent kitchen, Amina was making breakfast. She was 24 years old. She was beautiful in the way that morning is beautiful. Generous, unhurried, full of a warmth that had nothing to prove. Her dark skin glowed in the golden light. Her smile, when it came, was the kind that could quiet a room simply by entering it. Her heart was even larger than her smile, and she had given both, freely, completely, to this life, to this home, and to the man whose name was on the building beneath her feet. A few months earlier, Amina had given birth to their first child. Her body had changed, as bodies do after carrying life. She had gained weight. Her curves were softer now, rounder, fuller, the quiet, natural evidence of what she had done. She no longer had the flat stomach of her early 20s. But to Amina, those changes were not flaws. They were a testament. Every new curve was a verse in the story of the son sleeping peacefully in the next room. In his high chair nearby, little Kai gurgled and shook a bright yellow rattle, his chubby fists moving with the pure, joyful violence of a baby who has discovered that noise is power. Amina looked at him and felt, fully, completely, like the most fortunate woman alive. She believed, with everything she had, that what she shared with Jin-ho Kwan was unbreakable. That the man who had chosen her, who had looked at her across a crowded room and walked through every obstacle to reach her, would always be that man. She did not yet hear the footsteps changing. Jin-ho Kwan was not like other men. He was 36 years old, and he had never, in his adult life, walked into a room without owning it. He was the head of the most powerful Korean crime network operating on American soil, though no federal indictment had ever managed to attach his name to that sentence for longer than it took his lawyers to make it disappear. To Houston's elite, he was the CEO of Kwan Capital Investments, a man photographed at galas, a generous donor to hospitals and universities, a face that appeared on the covers of Texas business magazines beside headlines about emerging markets and bold futures. Ma to the men who worked for him in the shadows, the ones who moved cargo through the port of Houston, who ensured debts were collected and rivals were silenced. He was simply the architect. because he built things. And when necessary, he unmade them. And no one could ever tell from the outside which was happening until it was already done. He had loved Amina with a passion that had surprised even him. In the beginning, he had looked at her the way a man looks at something he cannot believe is real, with a stunned, grateful attention, as if she might vanish if he looked away. He had been tender in ways that none of his associates would have recognized. He had chosen her, not because she fit any template, but because she didn't fit any template, and that had felt, for the first time in his calculating life, like freedom. But something had changed. 3 months ago, Jin-ho had attended a summit of the most senior figures in the East Asian underworld, a gathering held in Dallas behind the sealed doors of a private estate, disguised as a business conference. 4 days, 50 men. The kind of dinner tables where fortunes were moved with a gesture and entire operations were rearranged with a nod. And at every table, at every dinner, the men had their wives beside them. Thin, sculpted, immaculate. Women who seemed to exist as living proof of their husband's control, not just over territory and money and power, but over the most intimate details of their domestic lives. Chairman O's wife, newly postpartum, already returned to a silhouette that drew comments and quiet, approving nods. The Lim brothers' wives, dressed in designer gowns that left no question, no softness, no room for anything as human as change. Jin-ho had sat at those tables and listened to the murmurs. The jokes told in Korean, low and smiling, about men whose wives had let themselves go. The implication, never spoken directly, always perfectly clear. A man who cannot manage his household cannot be trusted to manage an empire. Those words had entered him like a slow poison. He returned to Houston a different man. He returned looking at Amina with new eyes, not his own eyes, but borrowed ones, the cold, comparative eyes of 50 powerful men whose approval he had never needed until, suddenly, he did. He came into the kitchen that morning dressed in a black suit, his shoes striking the marble with the quiet, low rhythmic confidence of a man who has never once doubted his right to take up space. He stopped at the kitchen threshold. He looked at Amina. He no longer saw the woman who had sat up with him through 3 nights of fever, when his body finally surrendered to the stress he refused to acknowledge. He no longer saw the mother of his child, the person whose laugh had been the first thing in years to make him feel ordinary in a good way. His mind, clouded now with comparisons, saw only the softness at her waist, the roundness that motherhood had left, the loose shirt she wore because it was comfortable. "Are you eating again?" he said. His voice was not raised. Jin-ho Kwan never raised his voice. He delivered cold the way a blade delivers cold, quietly, precisely, and you only notice the cut after the fact. Amina turned, startled, setting down the wooden spoon. She met his eyes and felt it immediately, that new distance, that chilling space that had opened up between them like a crack in the foundation of something she had trusted completely. "I'm just preparing breakfast," she said softly, trying to keep her voice steady. "Kai will be hungry soon and make sure you're presentable tonight." He glanced at his phone. "My associates are coming. Their wives will be there. I want you dressed properly." He turned and walked toward his office before she could respond. The kitchen was silent. Outside, 42 floors below, Houston moved and breathed and rushed through another morning. Up here, the air had gone still in the specific way it goes still after something important has been said and cannot be unsaid. Amina stood with her hand on the counter and listened to her son rattle his yellow toy and told herself it was just stress, just the pressure of his world, just a season. She did not yet know that some seasons do not pass. Some seasons are only the beginning of the storm. By evening, the penthouse had been transformed. The caterers had arrived at 3. the florists at 4. By 7, the space was something out of a film. Low golden lighting, long tables dressed in black linen, a private bartender, music floating at exactly the right volume. The Houston skyline burned through the windows like a second party happening just outside the glass. The guests were all from Jin-Ho's world. Associates, lieutenants, trusted men, and their carefully presented wives. They moved through the penthouse with the particular ease of people who are always comfortable in expensive rooms, laughing at the right moments, never spilling, never too loud. Amina came down the hallway and into the main room in a long, deep green gown that was beautiful and did not hide her. She had done her hair, her makeup, her best. She held herself with dignity. The moment she appeared, she felt it. The eyes, the wives, slender in their fitted dresses, their bodies a collective argument about what was acceptable, turned toward her with smiles that did not reach anywhere important. Their gazes moved over her, the way appraisers move over furniture they are considering declining. And in the center of the room, at Jin-Ho's side, stood his mother. Mrs. Kwan had flown in from Dallas that afternoon. She was a small, more impeccably dressed woman who wore her wealth the way some people wear weapons, visibly, deliberately. She had never welcomed Amina. She had tolerated her with the icy patience of a woman who trusts that time will prove her right. She watched Amina cross the room and leaned close to her son. "Look at her, Jin-Ho," she murmured in Korean, her voice the temperature of the air inside a vault. "Your colleagues are watching. You can see it in their faces. A man of your position, your reputation, cannot afford to be seen as a man who has lost control of his own home." She straightened her bracelet. "The wedding is in 8 weeks. This cannot be what they see." Jin-Ho said nothing. He looked at Amina, who had reached the edge of the group and was smiling at something one of the wives had said. A real smile, generous and unguarded. The smile he had once called his favorite thing on earth. He looked at that smile, and he stepped back, slightly, just enough, putting distance between himself and her without moving his feet, the way only a man deeply practiced in controlled cruelty can do. Amina felt it across the room. She felt the withdrawal like a drop in temperature. She turned her head and found his eyes, and found them flat, careful, performing nothing, and understood, with the deep, wordless clarity that comes to women who have loved someone long enough to read the language beneath the language, that something had been decided tonight. Something she had not been consulted about. Something that concerned her entirely. She held her smile. She picked up a glass. She did not let a single person in that room see the crack. The morning after the party, the box arrived. Jin-Ho placed it on the dining table himself. He did not ask anyone to bring it. He opened it without ceremony, white tissue folded back to reveal ivory silk, hand-beaded, extraordinary, and held up the wedding dress. It was a masterpiece. It was also built for a woman who had never carried a child, or if she had erased all evidence of it. Amina stood on the other side of the table. She did not touch it. "The wedding is in 8 weeks, Jin-Ho said. His voice was measured and calm. "That is enough time." "Enough time for what, Jin-Ho?" "To be what I need you to be that day." She looked at the dress. She looked at him. "I had your baby 4 months ago." "I am aware. This dress was made for my wife." He folded his arms. "Or for the woman who intends to be my wife." The silence that fell between them was the loudest thing Amina had ever heard. Louder than the city below. Louder than her own heartbeat. Somewhere in the East Wing, she could hear Kai making small, contented sounds, entirely unaware that the world his parents had built around him had just developed a fracture that ran all the way to the foundation. Jin-ho? Her voice was quiet, steady. Please. You will wear that dress, he said. That is not a request. He picked up his phone and walked to his office. The door closed. Amina stood alone in the vast, beautiful, silent room, one hand on the table, looking at a dress that had been designed not for her body, but for her replacement, and understood, with a terrible, clarifying certainty, that the hardest part had not yet begun. The night Jin-ho Kwan threw Amina out of his penthouse, it was raining over Houston like the city itself was ashamed. The storm had been building since evening, the kind of Gulf Coast downpour that arrives without warning and leaves nothing dry. By midnight, the rain was hammering the 42nd floor windows with a sound like a crowd banging on glass. Thunder moved across the sky in long, rolling waves. The city below had gone dark and blurred, its lights smeared into streaks of red and gold by the sheeting water. Inside the master bedroom, the wedding dress lay spread across the bed like evidence. Jin-ho stood with his back to the window, his jacket off, his sleeves rolled to the elbows. He had been pacing for 20 minutes. His face wore the expression Amina had come to fear most. Not rage, not heat, but a cold, mechanical focus. As if he were solving a problem rather than ending a life. Put it on, he said. Amina stood on the other side of the bed. She had been standing very still, the way animals go still in the presence of something dangerous. Her hands were clasped in front of her. Kai was sleeping in the nursery down the hall. She could hear the baby monitor on the nightstand crackling softly with the sound of his breathing. Jin-ho! Put the dress on, Amina. She reached for it. Her hands were trembling. She felt them trembling and hated them for it, because she had promised herself she would not tremble in front of him anymore. She took the dress behind the bathroom door. She pressed the cold silk against her body. She reached for the zipper. The zipper climbed 4 inches. Then it stopped. She stood in the bathroom, alone, listening to the rain and to her own breathing, and she already knew. She had known for weeks. No amount of Marcus's careful rehabilitation, no amount of discipline or desperation could change what a body is in the 6th week after birth. The zipper was not going to move. The dress was not going to close. This had never been a goal. This had always been a verdict, written in advance, waiting to be delivered. She stepped back into the bedroom. The zipper was frozen halfway up her back. The fabric pulled across her hips. There was no disguising it, no angling away from it. A single tear slid down her left cheek. Only one, because she refused to give the room more than that. Jin-ho looked at her for a long moment. He did not shout. That was the cruelest part. I knew, he said quietly. I knew 3 weeks ago you weren't going to make it. He walked to the window, clasping his hands behind his back, looking out at the rain. You went to see Webb behind my back. You chose your comfort over my reputation, over everything I've built. He turned. That tells me everything I need to know about what you value. Jin-ho, I went to protect my health. Our son needed a healthy mother. Your son? Don't. The word was quiet and absolute, like a door locking. The wedding is canceled. The air left the room. The announcement goes out tomorrow. We will say there were logistical complications. My legal team will handle the rest. He walked to the closet, opened it, and began removing her things. Not violently, not in a rage, with the methodical efficiency of a man closing a file. Her dresses, her jewelry from the shelf, the things she had brought from her life before this building. 2 suitcases, already on the floor. She had not noticed them before. They had been there already. He had prepared this. Jin-ho, Her voice broke just once. Please, think of Kai. Think of the baby. He carried the suitcases to the foyer without answering. You are embarrassing me in front of the people I cannot afford to be embarrassed in front of, he said at the front door. His voice was steady, almost gentle, the way someone sounds when they have rehearsed something until it no longer hurts to say. In my world, weakness is an invitation. I cannot have my enemies see weakness in my home. He pressed the elevator button. The car will take you wherever you need to go. Amina looked at him. She looked at the man who had crossed a crowded room to reach her, who had learned the names of everyone she loved, who had pressed his lips to her hair on 100 quiet mornings, and whispered things that had felt, every time, like a promise. Who did they turn you into? She said softly. He did not answer. The elevator opened. Amina went back down the hall to the nursery. She lifted Kai from his crib without waking him. He stirred, sighed, settled against her chest with the absolute trust of a child who does not yet know that trust can be betrayed. She wrapped him in his blanket, pressed her face against his small, warm head, and breathed him in. Then she picked up her bag. She walked to the elevator. She stepped inside. The doors closed. 42 floors. The descent took less than a minute. The lobby of Quan Tower was all marble and silence at midnight. The doorman avoided her eyes. The security guard at the desk looked at his screen. The driver Jin Ho had sent was waiting outside under an umbrella, holding open the back door of a black SUV, his face professionally blank. The suitcases were already in the trunk. Amina stepped outside, and the rain hit her immediately. Cold, complete, indifferent. She stood on the pavement for a moment, Kai asleep against her chest, and looked up at the building. 42 floors of glass and steel and light. The penthouse windows were dark. She had no family in Houston. Her mother was in Atlanta. Her college friends had drifted to the edges of the life Jin Ho had built around her, gradually crowded out by associates and staff, and the sealed world of the Quan name. She had one number. She found it in her phone with fingers wet from the rain, her screen blurring, and pressed call. Marcus Webb answered on the second ring. She did not explain. She said 3 words. I need help. He said, Where are you? 30 minutes later, a dark pickup truck pulled up outside Quan Tower. Marcus got out into the rain without an umbrella. He didn't ask questions. He didn't look at the suitcases with pity or at the building with awe. He looked at Amina, at her wet face, at the baby bundled against her chest, at the particular stillness of a woman holding herself together through force of will alone, and he simply said, Come on, let's get you both inside. He carried the suitcases himself. He held an umbrella over Amina and Kai as they crossed the wet pavement. The rain beat down on his own shoulders, and he did not seem to notice. The drive across Houston was quiet. The windshield wipers moved back and forth in steady rhythm, clearing the glass, clearing it again, and the city moved past in streaks of neon and rain. Kai slept through all of it, one small fist pressed against Amina's collarbone, breathing with the deep, uncomplicated peace of someone who knows, in his bones, that he is held. Marcus lived in Midtown in a 2-bedroom apartment above his studio. A warm, plain, living space with bookshelves built into every wall and plants on every surface, and the particular calm of a home that has been made by someone who actually lives there rather than someone who performs living. There was no marble, no imported furniture, no art selected for what it communicated about the owner. It was the most comfortable place Amina had been in years. He set up Kai's portable crib in the guest room, and tucking the baby in with the practiced gentleness of a man at ease with small things. Then he made tea, actual tea, honey and ginger, steaming, set on the coffee table without ceremony, and sat across from Amina in the living room. She was still in her wet clothes. She was still holding herself very upright, very composed, the way she had been holding herself all night. "You don't have to be okay," Marcus said. And that was all it took. She cried for a long time. Not the silent single-tear crying she had been doing in Jinho's penthouse for months. The real kind. The kind that comes from somewhere deeper than grief. The kind that is also release. Marcus did not try to stop it, or redirect it, or fill it with words. He sat with it. He let it be what it was. When it passed, she looked up at him with red eyes and said, "What happens now?" "Now," Marcus said, "we figure out who you are when no one is measuring you." What followed was not a transformation story, not the kind that gets told in montages. It was slower than that, and realer than that, and harder than that, and better than that. Marcus had a philosophy about the body that was the opposite of everything Amina had lived inside for the past year. He believed the body was not a problem to be solved, but an instrument to be respected. He believed that a woman 6 weeks postpartum was not behind schedule. She was exactly where she was supposed to be, doing the most demanding physical work the human body is capable of. He built her a program based on this, not weight loss, recovery, strength, the return of energy that had been systematically stripped from her by measured meals and forced runs and the daily low-level terror of living with a man whose approval had become a moving target she could never reach. The meals in Marcus's apartment were real food, warm, plentiful, seasoned with care. He cooked often, quietly, the way people cook when food is not a moral statement, but a simple act of nourishment. Amina ate and felt, for the first time in nearly a year, like her body was something she was allowed to feed. In the mornings, while Kai played on the foam mat in the living room, she did gentle strength work in the studio downstairs. Not to be smaller, to be stronger. She lifted light weights and felt her back straighten. She stretched and felt muscles she had forgotten she owned. She boxed. Marcus had a heavy bag in the corner, and the first time she hit it, she cried. And the second time she hit it, she laughed, and after that, it became her favorite part of the day. Some mornings, Kai would be watching from his playpen when she finished, and he would look at her with his enormous eyes and clap his small hands together in a private, ecstatic applause that meant nothing and everything. 2 months passed. One morning, Amina stepped out of the shower and looked at herself in the bathroom mirror. Really looked, without the voice of Jinho in the back of her mind, without the measuring tape, without the wedding dress as the standard of evaluation. And she saw herself. Her skin was luminous. Her posture was different, upright, open, taking up space without apology. Her curves were still there, full and unapologetic, but now they looked like what they were, strength, evidence of what she had survived and what she had given. She had not become the woman in the dress. She had become someone the woman in the dress could never have been. While Amina was being rebuilt, Jinho Kwan was building something else entirely, and it was burning down around him. 3 months after Kwan Tower, the announcement of the canceled wedding had gone out in a single line in the business pages, attributed to scheduling conflicts. His legal team had been meticulous. To the outside world, nothing had happened. Jinho Kwan was still the architect, still untouchable, still photographed at galas. But inside the empire, things were shifting. Jinho had remarried within 60 days. Her name was Su Yan. She was the daughter of a Dallas crime figure, chosen for alliance and appearance, thin as a blade in every photograph, displayed at every function with the precision of a man proving a point. Chairman O had nodded approvingly. The Lim brothers had raised their glasses. Mrs. Kwan had declared it a triumph, and within 90 days, the empire had its first crack. Su-yeon understood money the way water understands the path of least resistance. She went through it effortlessly, completely, without friction. Designer clothing arrived weekly. The penthouse was redecorated twice. A second property was leased in Dallas. Jewelry that cost more than some of Jin-ho's operations generated in a quarter appeared on her wrists and neck and ears, like an argument he was too proud to answer. Jin-ho had wanted a wife who fit the image. He had gotten a wife who consumed the image from the inside. Meanwhile, the Southern Corridor, his corridor, the one he had spent 12 years building, was beginning to experience pressure from a rival faction out of Atlanta. Jin-ho had always managed his territory through personal attention, through relationships, through the kind of careful detail work that required a man to be mentally present. But he was not mentally present anymore. He was managing appearances. He was managing Su-yeon. He was managing the opinion of 50 men whose respect now felt, in moments of 3 a.m. silence, like a cage he had built himself and then climbed inside. His second in command, a Korean-American man named David Park, who had been loyal for 11 years, sat across from him in the Kwan Tower office one Tuesday evening and said, carefully, that the Atlanta problem required a decision by the end of the week. Jin-ho had been staring at his phone. He looked up. "Where's Su-yeon?" he said. David blinked. "Sir?" "Tonight. Where is she tonight?" A pause. "I believe she's at the boutique on River Oaks Boulevard, with her friends." "What's the spend this month?" David hesitated. Jin-ho watched him hesitate and knew the number was bad. 420,000, David said, across 6 accounts. The silence in the office was the kind that precedes decisions. Jin-ho turned his chair to face the window. 42 floors below, Houston glittered indifferently. He thought, without meaning to, about a kitchen. Morning light on black marble. A woman in a cream shirt making breakfast, moving with that unhurried warmth that had seemed to him once like the most valuable thing in the room. A baby in a high chair shaking a yellow rattle. He pushed the thought away. "Handle Atlanta," he said. "I'll handle the accounts." David nodded and left. Jin-ho sat alone with Houston spread below him like a kingdom that had somehow gotten heavier, and he could not have said exactly when. The billboard appeared on a Tuesday. It went up overnight on the side of a building at the corner of Westheimer and Post Oak, one of the most trafficked intersections in Houston, the heart of the Galleria district, where wealth moved loudly and publicly and demanded to be noticed. Jin-ho saw it from the back seat of his car on a Wednesday morning, on the way to a meeting. The driver slowed for a red light. Jin-ho looked up, and there she was, Amina. 12 feet tall on the side of a building, then wearing a gown in deep gold that moved around her curves like it had been designed by someone who understood that a woman's body was not a problem to be solved. Her head was high. Her gaze was direct, meeting the camera, meeting the entire intersection, without flinching. A single line of text beneath her image. True beauty never apologizes. Jin-ho stared at the billboard for the full duration of the red light. 28 seconds. His driver did not speak. When the light changed, Jin-ho looked back at his phone. He said nothing for the remainder of the drive, but his hand, resting on his knee, had closed into a fist. Not from anger, but from the specific, humiliating sensation of a man who has just realized, irrevocably, that the thing he discarded was the thing that mattered. Back in Midtown, the advertising agency director sat across from Amina and tapped a thick folder of contracts. "The campaign has generated more engagement than anything we've run in 5 years," she said, her voice carrying the particular warmth of a businesswoman in the presence of something she didn't have to manufacture. We have 3 additional brands requesting exclusivity conversations, and she paused, reaching for an envelope. There is something else. She slid the envelope across the desk. Amina opened it. Inside was an official letter on cream paper. The letterhead bore a crown logo she recognized immediately. Everyone in Texas recognized it. The Miss Texas International Committee is pleased to invite you to represent. Amina looked up. They changed the criteria this year, the director said. No measurements, no weight standards. They are specifically looking for women who represent something beyond the old template. She leaned forward. Amina, they want you. Not a version of you. Not a smaller you. You. Across the office, Marcus sat on the sofa with Kai on his lap. The little boy had gotten his hands on a pen and was conducting a serious investigation of its properties. Marcus watched Amina's face and waited. She felt it, the old reflex. The voice that had been installed in her by a year of being measured and found insufficient, whispering that stages were for other women, that crowns were for other bodies, that the only dress she had ever been asked to wear for a stage had not closed. She looked at Marcus. He held her gaze. You are not asking for their approval, he said quietly. You are going to show them what approval was always for. Kai looked up from his pen investigation and said something emphatic and unintelligible, as if adding his vote. Amina laughed. A real, full, unguarded laugh, the kind that had been her best quality long before anyone thought to measure it. She picked up the pen. She signed. The preparation was unlike anything Amina had experienced. No deprivation. No punishment. The agency brought in designers who came to her, who worked with her body as it was, building garments that moved with her rather than against her. The gowns that emerged were extraordinary, structured, rich, celebratory. They did not pretend she was something else. They declared exactly what she was. She practiced her walk, not to shrink it, but to expand it. A choreographer with 20 years in pageant training watched her move across the rehearsal room floor and said simply, "Stop trying to be careful. Let the floor feel you." She let the floor feel her. Her walk became a statement. Meanwhile, in a penthouse 42 floors above Houston, the empire was hemorrhaging. Soo Yan's credit accounts had been frozen following a confrontation that had ended with shattered glassware and a call to the legal team. The Atlanta faction had moved on 2 of Jinho's distribution routes while his attention was elsewhere. The Dallas alliance, the one his marriage to Soo Yan had been designed to secure, was fracturing at the seams because the Dallas figure had realized his daughter was being used as a prop and had taken the insult personally. David Park placed another folder on Jinho's desk and said nothing. Jinho opened it. He read it for a long time. Then he closed it, straightened his tie, and sat very still in his chair, looking at the city below, and understood. In the way men like him understand things, late and completely and without the mercy of gradual arrival. That he had made a catastrophic error. Not in strategy, not in territory, not in any of the calculations that had governed his life for 15 years. He had mistaken the architecture for the foundation. He had built everything on what people could see, and thrown away the only thing that had been real. The night before the Miss Texas International pageant, Jinho's phone rang at 11 p.m. It was David. "She's in the competition," David said. "Amina, she's a finalist. It's all over social media. The whole city is talking about her." Jinho sat in the silent penthouse. Soo Yan had been in Dallas for a week, and the apartment without her was no quieter but significantly less expensive, and looked at his phone. "She's going to win," David said. There was something in his voice, not quite sentiment, not from a man like David, but something adjacent to it. You can see it just from the photos. Jin-ho set the phone face down on the table. He sat with the city of Houston spread below him, the lights of River Oaks and the Galleria and the ship channel blinking in the dark. The empire he had built visible from where he sat. Enormous and suddenly, terribly insufficient. He had thrown a woman into the rain to protect an image, and the image had crumbled anyway. And the woman was about to walk onto the biggest stage in Texas, where Jin-ho Kwon, the architect, the man who built things and unmade them, sat alone in his 42-floor kingdom and felt, for the first time in as long as he could remember, the specific, unmanageable weight of a choice that could not be unmade. Outside, Houston breathed on, and tomorrow was coming, whether he was ready or not. The night of the Miss Texas International Pageant, Houston dressed itself for the occasion. The George R. Brown Convention Center, the crown jewel of one of the richest cities in the wealthiest state in America, blazed with light from every entrance. Limousines curved along the arrivals drive in a slow, gleaming procession. Camera flashes sparked like small lightning along the red carpet. The crowd outside pressed against the barriers 3 rows deep, holding phones aloft, searching every arriving face for the one they had come to see. Inside, the grand ballroom had been transformed into something that bordered on spectacle. A stage the length of a city block, flooded with warm gold lighting. A symphony orchestra in the pit. 12,000 seats filled to the last. The air electric with the particular charge of an audience that has agreed, collectively, to feel something tonight. The presenter, a woman in a white tuxedo whose voice had the gravity of someone who understood they were part of something historic, stood at the microphone and looked out at the audience. "Tonight," she said, "we are changing what this stage has always meant." Across town, in a furnished apartment in the 3rd Ward that cost $1,100 a month, a number that would have once been beneath Jin-ho Kwon's notice and now represented a genuine calculation, Jin-ho sat on a rented couch in front of a television he had not chosen. 6 months had passed since the empire began its structured collapse. Soo-yeon was gone. She had left with the same efficiency with which she had arrived. A single afternoon, 2 assistants, everything portable removed with the thoroughness of someone who had been keeping a mental inventory from the beginning. The legal team had been expensive to retain. The Dallas Alliance had dissolved entirely. 2 of the Southern Corridor's primary routes had been absorbed by the Atlanta faction, while Jin-ho's attention was split in 17 directions, none of them the right one. The Kwon Tower penthouse had been surrendered to the bank in a negotiated arrangement that David Park had brokered with the quiet devastation of a loyal man doing the worst errand of his career. The Kwon capital offices had been folded. The assets, the art, the cars, the imported furniture, had been liquidated in tranches, each one a small, additional burial. Mrs. Kwon, who had engineered the union with Soo-yeon and declared it a triumph, had stopped returning his calls in February. She was in Seoul now, staying with a cousin, sending messages through intermediaries about her pension that carried the specific bitterness of a woman who had placed a bad bet and was determined to blame the table. Jin-ho sat in the 3rd Ward apartment in a plain shirt and looked at the television. He had not intended to watch the pageant. He had turned the television on for noise, for the specific, pathetic comfort of a man who cannot stand the sound of his own silence. The channel had been left on something forgettable. Then the broadcast cut to the George R. Brown Convention Center, and the presenter's voice filled the small apartment. "Ladies and gentlemen, we are about to meet the woman who has made all of Texas stop and look again." The curtains at the back of the stage parted, and Amina walked out. Jin-ho did not move. She was wearing a gown in deep crimson, rich, structured, designed by someone who understood that fabric should declare rather than conceal. It moved with her as she walked, the long train flowing behind her across the stage, like something ceremonial, like the closing of a sentence that had been building for a very long time. Her hair was braided high, adorned with gold thread, a crown before the crown. Her head was lifted. Her shoulders were back and open. Her face was the thing that stopped the room and stopped Jin-ho, because it held something he had never seen there in all the time he had known her. Not happiness, exactly. Deeper than happiness. Peace. The specific, unassailable peace of a woman who no longer needs anyone in the room to tell her what she is worth. The audience rose before she had even reached center stage. 12,000 people, standing, the sound of it filling the building like weather. Women in the crowd were crying openly, not from sadness, but from recognition. The piercing emotion of seeing yourself on a stage that was never built for you, finally, irrevocably, standing there. Jin-ho watched Amina walk across that stage and felt something move in his chest. Not the flutter of love, not the warmth of pride, but something older and harder and less forgiving. The sensation of a man watching the consequence of his own choices walk toward him from across a distance he cannot cross. He had measured her. He had found her insufficient. He had put her out in the rain, and she had walked through the rain and come out the other side as something the stage lights seemed specifically designed to illuminate, as if the universe had been arranging the lighting for years in advance, waiting for her to arrive. Jin-ho pressed his hands flat on his knees and did not look away. In the front row of the George R. Brown, Marcus Webb sat in a dark suit with Kai on his lap. Kai was 3 years old now, so sturdy and serious and luminously alive, dressed in a small white shirt and a clip-on bow tie that he had already partially removed. He looked up at the stage with enormous eyes, scanning the lights and the crowd and the curtain of golden glitter that had just fallen from the ceiling rigging, with the expression of a child confronted by something so beautiful it requires complete stillness to process. Then he saw his mother. He pointed at the stage. He said something emphatic and clear in the private language of a 3-year-old that translated in any language to, "That is her. That is mine. Look." And then he clapped. Both hands hard over and over, his small face broken open with the kind of joy that has no ambivalence in it. Pure, directed, complete. Amina heard it. Across 12,000 people and a symphony orchestra and the roar of a crowd, she heard her son's particular clap. She would have heard it in a hurricane, and she looked down into the front row and found him. Found Marcus holding him. Found the two of them, the man who had carried her suitcases in the rain, and the boy who had slept against her chest through the worst night of her life, sitting in the front row of the biggest stage in Texas, watching her arrive. She smiled, the full, private, unguarded smile, the one that had nothing to do with the cameras or the crowd or the crown she had not yet received. And for just one moment, the stage and the lights and the 12,000 people fell away, and there was only this, the proof that she had survived, and it was worth it, and it was here. The presenter came forward with the microphone and the golden envelope. The music softened. The crowd settled. The silence that fell over the George R. Brown Convention Center was the kind that only happens when 12,000 people decide, simultaneously, that what comes next matters. "Amina," the presenter said, her voice carrying the specific weight of a question already understood to be historic. "You have become something more than a candidate tonight. You have become a mirror in which thousands of women have seen themselves, perhaps for the first time without flinching." She paused. "If you could say one thing tonight, one thing, to every woman in this country who has been told she is not enough, what would you say? The silence deepened. Amina held the microphone for a moment without speaking. She closed her eyes, just for a breath, just long enough to gather the whole of it. The dress on the bed, the zipper that would not close, the rain on the pavement outside Quan Tower, the elevator descent, the cold lobby, Marcus's headlights in the dark, the tea on the coffee table, the mirror on a Tuesday morning, the billboard on Westheimer, and Kai's hands clapping from the front row of the biggest room she had ever stood in. She opened her eyes. "A few years ago," she said, her voice clear and unhurried and carrying to every corner of the hall. "A man handed me a dress I could not fit into and told me that my body, as it was, after carrying his child, after giving him everything I had, was a source of shame." She paused, not for effect, because the memory still had weight and she was not going to pretend it didn't. "I believed him. For a while, I believed him. I stopped eating. I ran until I fell. I looked at myself in the mirror and tried to see what he saw. The room was absolutely still. And then someone showed me something different." Her gaze found Marcus in the front row and stayed there for one beat. "He showed me that a body that has carried life is not a body that has failed. It is a body that has triumphed, and that no dress, no measurement, no number, no standard built by people who are afraid of what a real woman looks like, is worth one single day of hating yourself." A sound moved through the crowd. Not applause yet, something before applause, the collective exhale of recognition. I would tell every woman in this room, every woman watching from home, every woman who has ever stood in front of a mirror and heard someone else's voice instead of her own. She lifted her chin. Her voice did not waver. "You are not the problem. You have never been the problem. Gold does not lose its value because someone throws it in the mud. And you are gold. Every curve, every mark, every soft and powerful inch of you." She paused one final time. "Never stay where you are only tolerated. Go where you are celebrated." The George R. Brown Convention Center did not applaud. It erupted. 12,000 people on their feet simultaneously, the sound of it physical, a pressure in the chest. The kind of noise that is not made by individuals, but by something that moves through individuals when they have all felt the same true thing at the same moment. Women were crying in the aisles. Women were holding each other. Women were holding up their phones not to record, but to point the screen at themselves, at their own faces, as if to say, "This is for you. This is about you. This is yours." The jury did not deliberate. The presenter opened the golden envelope. She looked at the card inside. She looked up at the crowd. She looked at Amina. "The Miss Texas International title goes to—" She stopped, smiled, set the card down on her podium. "You all already know." The lights in the hall went out. A single white beam fell on Amina, and the room fell away, and there was nothing in the world in that moment except a woman standing in a column of light that she had earned through rain and hunger and the long, patient work of becoming herself again. "Amina Diallo." The confetti fell from the ceiling in a cascade of gold. Thousands of small pieces of gold catching the single beam, filling the air around her with light, as if the room itself were celebrating. The symphony orchestra resumed at full volume. The former Miss Texas came forward, carrying a crown on a red velvet cushion, diamonds and yellow gold, shaped like a rising sun, and placed it on Amina's head with both hands and a look that said, "Carry this well." Amina stood at the edge of the stage with the crown on her head and the gold falling around her, and 12,000 people chanting her name, and she looked down at Kai, her son, her evidence, the best thing she had ever done. And he looked back at her with his enormous eyes full of confetti and wonder. And he said something only she could hear across that impossible distance. She heard it. She pressed her hand to her heart. In the third ward apartment, Jin-ho Kwan watched the crown being placed on Amina's head and felt the remote control become too heavy to hold. He set it on the cushion beside him. On the screen, the camera pulled back to show the full stage. Amina in the center of all that gold and light and noise, the crown catching the beam, the crowd a single living thing of joy and recognition. The camera found Marcus in the front row, standing, holding Kai on his shoulders so the boy could see over the crowd, both of them clapping, both of them luminous with the specific happiness of people who have earned what they are feeling. Jin-ho looked at the man holding his son. He looked at his son, pointing at the stage, laughing into the lights. He looked at the woman he had put out in the rain over a dress, and he understood, not partially, not with the protective instincts of a man finding reasons to redistribute blame, but completely, with the full and merciless clarity of a man who has run out of deflections. What he had done. What he had actually done. Not to an image, not to a reputation, to a person, to a family, to a child who was now on another man's shoulders in the front row of a room full of gold, looking at his mother like she was the sun. Jin-ho Kwan, who had spent his entire adult life constructing things that could not be dismantled, sat in a rented apartment with the television painting his face blue and felt, for the first time, completely, irrevocably dismantled. He did not cry. He sat with it. The way you sit with things that are entirely, permanently your fault. 3 months after the pageant, Amina was leaving a charity gala at the Post Oak Hotel. Her life had become a different geography. Brand campaigns, speaking invitations, a foundation she was building, a center for women who had been measured and found wanting, who had been handed dresses they couldn't close and told the failure was theirs. The Amina Webb Foundation. She had taken Marcus's name in a private ceremony in March, small and warm and nothing like a performance, witnessed by Kai and the agency director and one close friend. No cameras, no guest list curated for optics, just the truth of two people choosing each other. She came out of the Post Oak into the warm Houston night, Marcus at her side in a dark tuxedo, 2 bodyguards leading the way to the car. She wore an off-white suit that fit her exactly as she was. A simple gold pendant at her throat. A rising sun, a reminder. A figure emerged from the shadow alongside the hotel entrance. The bodyguards moved immediately. Hands up, a wall of shoulder and authority, stopping the figure before he could reach her. He stumbled. He fell to his knees on the marble pavement of the Post Oak's entrance court. Amina! The voice was broken, barely recognizable. Please, it's me. She stopped. She knew the voice before she saw the face. She would have known it in any condition, at any distance. She had heard it in the rain. She had heard it say, "You bring me shame," in a tone so measured, it had been more devastating than a shout. She stepped forward. Her bodyguards held their position, but let her pass. She looked down. Jin-ho Kwan was on his knees on the marble of the Post Oak Hotel, dressed in a shirt that had once been expensive and was now just old, his face hollowed by months of a life stripped of everything that had been structural. The arrogance was gone. The architecture was gone. What remained was just a man, diminished, frightened, carrying the specific ruin that belongs exclusively to people who built themselves on the wrong foundation. Marcus stepped forward. One step, instinctive, protective. Amina placed her hand on his arm. She shook her head slightly. She had this. She looked at Jin-ho for a long moment. Her face was calm, not the forced calm of someone suppressing feeling, but the genuine stillness of a woman who has processed what needs to be processed and arrived somewhere that can hold what it needs to hold. Amina, I have lost everything, Jinho said. His voice was raw. Suyan, the business, the building. My mother won't speak to me, my men are gone. Everything I built. He stopped, swallowed. I was wrong. I know that. I know there is nothing I can say that is enough. But please, please, think of Kai. Think of our son. Let me. At the word son, something moved in Amina's eyes. Quick, cold. The flash of a woman who remembers a specific night, a specific rain, a specific weight against her chest. Do not, she said quietly. Use my son's name to carry your regret. Jinho flinched. The man who threw us into the rain on a night like that one. She gestured at the warm Houston dark, the city breathing around them, and closed the door on a woman holding a baby. Because she did not fit into a dress. That man made a choice. Her voice was not raised. It did not need to be raised. It had a quality now, built from everything she had survived, that made volume unnecessary. He chose his image over his family. He chose 50 men's approval over the mother of his child. Jinho lowered his head. I spent months believing I was the problem. Amina continued. I starved myself. I ran until my body gave out. I cried in a bathroom trying to close a zipper while my newborn son was sleeping down the hall. She paused. And then I understood. A man who asks you to erase yourself has never actually seen you. You did not love me, Jinho. You loved what you wanted me to represent. And when I couldn't represent it, you disposed of me. He was crying now, silently, the tears of a man who has no more argument left. You come to me on your knees tonight because I have a crown, she said, her voice carrying the final clean cut of a woman delivering truth rather than revenge. But Marcus, he found me on my knees, in the rain, holding your son. And he saw the crown then, when there were no cameras, no galas, no title. He saw it when I couldn't see it myself. She took one step back. I forgive you, she said. Not for you, for me, so that I never carry the weight of your choices again. She looked at him one last time, the full, direct look of a woman who has done the work and earned her peace. Stay in the life you built, Jinho. I hope you find your way out of it. But that path has nothing to do with me. She turned. Marcus was beside her. His hand found hers. Not dramatically, not for the cameras. Just there, solid and warm and entirely without condition. The hand of a man who had been exactly who he was from the beginning. The car door opened. They got inside. The engine turned. The lights of Houston moved past the tinted windows. River Oaks, the Galleria, the ship channel glittering in the distance. And the city went on doing what cities do, indifferent to the small, enormous human things happening in its margins. Jinho knelt on the marble of the Post Oak Hotel entrance until the taillights disappeared. Then he was alone in the warm Houston night with the sound of his own breathing and the understanding that some doors, once closed with enough finality, do not open from the outside. 5 years later, on a bright Tuesday morning in the Midtown neighborhood of Houston, a new building opened its doors for the first time. The facade was white stone and wide glass, and the letters above the entrance were cast in solid brass. The Amina Webb Foundation, a place to remember who you are. It was not a beauty clinic. It was not a gym. It was a free center, staffed by therapists, nutritionists, fitness coaches, legal advisors, for women who had been broken by the specific, insidious violence of being told they were not enough. Women leaving dangerous homes. Women who had starved themselves for someone else's approval. Women who had stood in front of mirrors for so long, hearing someone else's voice, that they had forgotten the sound of their own. Amina stood on the wide terrace, in a dress the color of the Texas sky, deep, unhurried blue, and held a pair of gold scissors above the red ribbon stretched across the entrance. Around her neck, her rising sun pendant caught the morning light. Her beauty had changed, not diminished, deepened. The softness of her face was the softness that comes from having been through things and decided, on the other side, not to be hardened by them. Her curves were exactly as they had always been. Evidence, testimony, the unapologetic physical fact of a woman who had refused, finally and permanently, to be anything other than herself. On the lawn beside the building, Kai ran after a red ball with the full, unself-conscious commitment of a 5-year-old for whom running is still a pure and sufficient reason for joy. His laughter carried across the morning air, bright and specific, the exact sound that had given Amina the strength to make phone calls in the rain and get into strange cars and believe when belief was the hardest possible thing. That she was worth saving. Marcus chased him across the lawn, caught him, collapsed dramatically into the grass while Kai shrieked with delight and clambered on top of him. They rolled in the green, laughing, the man who had come into the rain without an umbrella and the boy who had slept through it, tangled together in the morning light of a Tuesday that contained no performance, no measurement, no gaze that needed to be satisfied. Amina watched them. She pressed the gold pendant to her chest. She cut the ribbon. Across Midtown, on a screen mounted above the entrance to an electronics store on Main Street, the local news was running footage of the foundation's opening. Cameras on Amina, on the ribbon, and on the hundreds of women who had come out this Tuesday morning to stand on the sidewalk and applaud the opening of a place built specifically for them. A man pushing a cart of cardboard boxes down the adjacent alley stopped. He looked up at the screen. His hands, once manicured, once the hands of a man who ran a criminal empire from the 42nd floor of his own building, were rough and blistered now. His face had aged beyond its years, not the distinguished aging of a man who has lived well, but the compressed, accelerated aging of a man who has lived with deep and constant regret. He had been collecting cardboard for 3 months, selling it to a recycling center on Washington Avenue for enough to cover the room in the East End boarding house where he slept. Jin-Ho Kwan looked at the screen. He saw Amina cutting the ribbon, on her crown of braids, her rising sun pendant, her blue dress moving in the morning breeze. He saw Marcus lifting Kai onto his shoulders so the boy could see above the crowd. He saw his son, 5 years old now, laughing in the arms of a man who had earned that position one rainy night at a time, pointing at the cameras with the pure, unguarded joy of a child who has never been told his joy is inconvenient. The weight of it moved through Jin-Ho like weather. He did not move toward the screen. He did not reach for his phone. There was no one to call, no name to trade on, no architecture left to hide behind. He stood in the alley with his cart and his blistered hands and looked at the life he had thrown away. The woman, the child, the warmth, the morning light, the simple, devastating abundance of a family who loved each other without condition and felt it settle on him with the full, permanent gravity of something that was never going to lift. He grasped the handles of his cart. He walked back into the shadow of the alley. The screen behind him continued to broadcast Amina's face. Composed, radiant, looking directly into the camera with the steady gaze of a woman who has learned that the most powerful thing you can do after someone has tried to erase you is simply to be entirely and unapologetically present. The morning light over Houston grew warmer. The foundation's doors opened. The first women walked inside. The loop closed. This is what the story of Jin-Ho and Amina teaches us in the end. You cannot build a lasting empire on the diminishment of another person. Jin Ho Kwan believed his worth lived in what people could see, in the silhouette of the woman on his arm, in the approval of 50 men around a dinner table, in an image so carefully constructed it left no room for anything as human as love. And when the image crumbled, as images always crumble, as everything built on appearances eventually crumbles, there was nothing underneath it. No foundation, no warmth, no one left to call. His mother had chosen image over truth and found herself in soul, bitter and alone. His second wife had chosen wealth over love and left the moment the wealth ran out. His empire had chosen spectacle over substance and collapsed under its own hollow weight. And Jin Ho himself had chosen the approval of men he did not love over the woman who had loved him completely, and discovered, too late, that the approval of men who only value appearances is worth exactly what it costs, everything real you have ever owned. Amina, on the other hand, teaches us something different. She teaches us that surviving is not the same as winning, and that winning is not about revenge. She did not rise to punish Jin Ho. She rose because she stopped letting him define the ceiling. She ate real food. She built real strength. She walked onto a real stage in a dress that celebrated exactly what she was, and she spoke the truth in a clear voice, and 12,000 people stood up, not because she had become someone else, but because she had, finally, completely, become herself. The great lesson is this: your value does not live in a zipper. It does not live in a number or a measurement or the opinion of a man who is afraid of real things. It lives in the same place it has always lived, in the quality of your heart, in the strength of what you have survived, in the warmth you bring into rooms that were cold before you entered them. Gold does not apologize for being gold, and you are gold. Never stay where you are only tolerated. Go where you are celebrated.